Hi guys. So we're going to get started here. He's not dropping out, I'll just say that immediately. So we're going to talk today about what it means to run a campaign. I think that a lot of people, when you start a campaign, that you do it and you go and you ask people what you would like them to have you focus on, you want what issues matter to them, and then you do some work and you say, this is what I stand for, this is what I think would help you, and then you meet more experts and then you go campaign on those issues. But unfortunately, that's not what actually happens. I think that we can see that even in this race. I think that if you look and some of our competitors, at this very moment, they lack an issues page, they lack a bio page. They have very little on their website besides a donate button and an email capture button. And that's not the type of issues that we want to run. That's not the type of campaign that we're committed to. And what really strikes me is the first meeting that we went to after we announced was in Van Buren County. And they told us that they hadn't seen a federal person come to their Democratic Party meeting since they can't remember. They thought it was 2010 at the earliest. Just today, before you guys showed up, a volunteer from Morrilton that knocked over 50 doors yesterday came and said, we were stunned by how many people said they were just welcomed us into their home because they hadn't spoken to anybody. Nobody has knocked on their doors before, on either side. And we're thankfully afforded that with the campaign that we have and with the candidate that we get to work for. We've spent the last 8 months talking to voters in meetings like Sierra Club and meetings in Pulaski County Democrats, White County Democrats, Saline County Progressives, you name it, we've probably been there. And one thing that they ask me or some of the other candidates or some of the other people on staff is, why don't millennials vote? Why don't they pay attention? Why do they not care enough? And I kind of find that kind of sending, because I don't think that that's, why would we care when the prescriptions that candidates are offering are half measured, half baked, and then we're told by a lot of the people that cover these races, they refer to the perfection of their candidacy. Some people even in the opinion pages in the state newspapers say things like that. And I think that as a millennial, it's kind of disheartening when you hear things like that. And so what we're doing today is we're offering prescriptions to the problems that people have been telling us for about 8 months. And I would like just to introduce Paul, and a lot of us are former students, but some of us aren't. A lot of us are motivated by the message that Paul is saying and the idea that Paul is actually going to places where Democrats should go. Not the same living rooms they've been in for 30 years, but the living rooms of actual people in outlying counties, in the 12th Street corridor, not in the Heights, not in the Hillcrest area, which are important, but they're not the only neighborhoods in the 2nd District. That's about 3 zip codes of 91 in the 2nd District. And so with any further ado, I'd like to introduce Paul Spencer. He's the next congressman for the 2nd District, and here he is.
Thank you, Reed. Excuse me, thank you for coming today. We sure appreciate it. It's good seeing those familiar faces. One of the things that we realized as we began to undertake this campaign was you have to do more than just run against something or somebody. And, you know, the stakes in Arkansas are too high. The stakes across the country are just too high to just, well, you know, we're going to have a meme-based candidacy going against President Trump, going against this or that or other issue. So we realized that very early on that you have to stand for something that has worth and intrinsic value that benefits the people of the 2nd District, that benefits the people of the country. And since the days of, I guess, last winter when we started talking about running, all to the time that we announced in I guess it was June of last year, that's been the consistent message, and that's why I've enjoyed working with these folks. They're very adamant about standing for something instead of against something. So, you know, that kind of had us reevaluate what the role of the political parties even are. You know, we look at the Democratic Party and, you know, what does it stand for? We look at the Republican Party, what does it stand for? So you know, and all the times it's an issue, or it's identity based, or you know, nothing of any real solidity. So, you know, we have to acknowledge that that is probably a product of a rigged system. When you have so much donor money coming in, when you have so much special interest money coming into the coffers of whether it's the Democratic National Committee or the DCCC or the Republican Party, that certainly has to skew the way they look at their constituents and the way that they promulgate their policies for the future. So we have to acknowledge that this is a significant problem. We have to acknowledge that we have to find a different way forward. And you know, we look around us and we see that, you know, our young people are burdened with insurmountable debt after they've graduated from college. We look around us and we see, you know, so much faction and so much animosity between the parties. We see, particularly with the latest shootings in the United States, the mass shootings, that we see that special interest probably, you know, the NRA probably has a lot to do with the ability to rein in gun violence in this country, because you're not allowed to bring the issue of gun violence up in Congress without being rebuked or out of fear of having your funding taken away. We see a wasteful for-profit healthcare system in this country that leaves thousands and millions of people underserved, to say the very least, people going into debt from bankruptcies, from medical procedures that they absolutely need but can't afford. So, you know, we also see voter suppression. There, you name it, there's a myriad number of things out there that really should be the focus of any congressional candidate or any presidential candidate or any state house candidate. And those things just aren't happening. And when you do try to offer up honest to goodness solutions, what you get is, well, that's not feasible. And we've heard that from the get-go. When we decided we weren't going to take campaign money from PACs or special interests, people said, that's a death knell, you're going to lose. But here we are, 8 months later, one of the best funded campaigns in this state. So when you listen to what the outside tells you, that's not necessarily the right way forward. So, you know, when we look at our financial policies too, as we go forward, and we look at the things that need to happen to really place representation where it should be, which is on the people, that's where the momentum needs to be, and that's where the effort needs to be. We talk about, you know, we're looking at the finances of the country today, you know, how our new tax code is going to affect people, how the economic factors of a healthcare system that's fundamentally broken. And, you know, you see who the beneficiaries of all that is. It's the special interests. You know, and we've also, you know, lived under this idea of trickle-down economics. You know, Bruce Bartlett from back in the Reagan administration, he was the great advocate of this. And now he's turned away from that because he realizes that in this economic climate, that simply doesn't work anymore. So we need to forge a way forward that emphasizes the common good, that de-emphasizes the former path that money always took, which was to the donor class, which was to the special interest. So we would like to see programs that emphasize the people rather than the institutions. So today we're going to talk about 6 different ideas that our campaign has had. We've been working on these things for quite some time, and we believe that this is a viable way forward. We believe it's a prudent way forward. And we believe that these policies and these suggestions will help put money in people's pockets. Real money for real people, rather than going into a banking lobbyist or the NRA, where they'll just invest in more politicians. We believe that when you give money to actual people, they can have their car fixed, they can have their washing machine repaired, they can get a haircut, and all those things go back into the economy immediately, and that generates tax, and that generates affluence and success. So we refer to this as the Roots Up campaign because we're tired of trickle down. And these are things that have to happen. And like I said, we spoke amongst ourselves for months on end, looking for the right way to go about doing this. And it wasn't until after we began speaking to the folks that we met out in the counties and in all the different places that Reed mentioned earlier. These aren't policies that were made up from some think tank. These are policies that we believe that, as speaking to the folks, these are the way forward. So I would like to introduce Meredith Morrison. She's our first presenter today.
Hey there, I'm Meredith. I work on Paul's campaign staff, and I'm going to talk about postal banking. So I'm pretty sure you all remember the Great Recession. It's hard to forget. I was a freshman in high school when the stock market collapsed, and I wasn't really watching the stock market. I wasn't really watching much beyond Friday Night Football, but it was hard to ignore, and it certainly didn't go unnoticed when many of the houses in my small town went up for sale. Several friends had to move. And it's been a decade since the Great Recession. And, there are still lingering effects. And one of those is the inaccessibility of traditional banking. 88 million people, that's 38% of the U.S. population, is unbanked or underbanked. Central Arkansas, our home, is a devastating example of the geographic, racial, and socioeconomic disparities in access to banking. If you drive down East Little Rock in the 12th Street corridor, that's a 13 square mile radius. There is only one bank. But if you go to the affluent Heights neighborhood, which is a 2.8 mile radius and about 5,000 people, there are 14 traditional banks. Many Americans, many Arkansans use predatory payday lenders to cash paychecks, deliver cash advancements, and make bill payments because they don't have any other option. Unbanked families spend an average of 10% of their annual income just paying regular fees, and that's about $2,400 every year. But there is a solution, and that's postal banking. And postal banking isn't a new or bold idea. It actually was implemented between 1911 and 1966, and 139 countries around the world use postal banking. Postal banking will provide free checking and savings accounts, low interest loans, and low interest business loans, and allow users to pay bills without additional fees. And postal banking, it's one of those things where you might ask yourself, is this feasible? Well, as Paul mentioned, feasibility shouldn't be a question if it's the right thing to do, first of all, but it is feasible because postal banking or post offices are in every community. It's accessible, it's an infrastructure that's already in place. So thank you, and we'll take questions after. I'll address those after all the speakers. And next, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Leif Hassel. He'll be talking about rural broadband access.
Good morning. As she said, my name is Leif Hassel. I've been working in IT here in Little Rock off and on about 15 years. And I'm also a member of a group currently trying to start a community broadband cooperative here in Little Rock. But that said, I want to talk to you a little bit about how broadband works, not here in the city, but in the country. I'm of an age, and I'm sure at least some of you are, old enough to remember when I was a kid living in rural Faulkner County, I had a party line telephone. You weren't sure if you could make a phone call because somebody else might already be on there. And a lot of places in Arkansas didn't have their own phone lines until the mid-'80s. And a lot of that came because of a piece of legislation that started in 1934 called the Communications Act of 1934. What that act did was it said that phones were going to be a common carrier and that we were going to ensure that rural areas that weren't as profitable to serve still got the phone service they needed to form viable communities. Now, what that did, though, is it forced the monopoly, at that time AT&T, to have to cover everybody rather than just worrying about where the most money was going to come to them. And you may ask, well, what does this have to do with broadband? Why are we talking about the internet here? And the thing is, it's the exact same situation. A lot of Arkansas is very rural. We rank currently at 48th in the nation for broadband access. And of that, examples like Van Buren County, where only 7% of the population has access to what we would call true broadband speeds. And that's even with the FCC's current definition. The FCC kind of cheated us a little bit this last year when Trump's handpicked supervisor, Ajit Pai, lowered the broadband speed. It used to be that broadband was defined as 25 megabits up and 5 megabits down. It's now been reduced to 10 megabits up and 1 megabit down in order to make it seem like more places were covered. However, so what do we do there? Well, as it turns out, there's already money in the FCC budget that's been allocated to extending rural broadband. That money is about $2 billion, and it was allocated several years ago. It hasn't really been spent very much, though, and the money that is right now currently being limited essentially to the big three ISPs. A lot of that money goes to Verizon and AT&T and Comcast, and they don't have a whole lot of incentive to actually make a lot of real change in that market. So what we would like to see happen is, first off, extend that money to allow communities, to allow small businesses to extend that broadband coverage into the communities they serve. Because the people who live in those communities have an interest in seeing that their people get served. Particularly, we would also like to see laws in states like Arkansas that prevent communities from forming their own broadband. Because if you're in a community that has any coverage at all, under Arkansas law, with the exception of a few cities and townships that have been grandfathered in, cities and municipalities are not allowed to provide broadband service to their citizens, and that really needs to change. Now, why is that important? Well, a lot of politicians, particularly Republicans, will tell you that small businesses are what grow economies, that most jobs come from small businesses. And those small businesses need the communications infrastructure in order to maintain those businesses. So we want to see folks in Clinton, folks in Searcy, folks in Cabot have the broadband access that they need for small businesses to grow up in their municipalities and provide jobs for their people. Those small businesses, unlike a large corporation dropped in from who knows where, have an incentive to stay in that community and make sure that that community prospers. So, but more than just the businesses, it's important that every citizen has that access. So many government services, so much of information now. Just being an informed citizen really requires us to have access to the internet. And that access should be something that we take for granted as much as we would take making a phone call. So I'm just going to ask you, please consider that proposition. And in the meantime, while we'll move on to another proposition, Stephanie Spencer, Paul's wife, is going to speak to us about healthcare and, pardon me.
Well, my name is Stephanie, and I've been an RN for 25 years, been married to Paul for the last 21 years, and I'm presenting a proposal called Fighting Escalating Healthcare Costs by Empowering Local Farmers. And so I've specialized mainly in cardiology for the last couple decades, and specifically I directed an outpatient heart failure program. Heart failure is the #1 expense to the Medicare program. And I found that the most crucial factor in keeping my patients out of the hospital, which is what causes all the expense for heart failure patients, is getting them to eat a healthier diet, a lower sodium, less processed food diet. And I've never had enough time to spend with my patients because this is a high intensity, high touch type of thing, trying to get people to eat differently. And it was always really frustrating. I mean, it's very frustrating to us in the medical community that there is no way to bill for this. Medicare does not cover dietary teaching for the most expensive patient population that readmits because they eat crappy food, basically. But so anyway, this has always been a great source of frustration. That we incentivize costly and invasive procedures, but we don't incentivize by reimbursement, the things that will prevent these procedures. So, however, there are a couple recent developments on the horizon in the form of 2 newly approved Medicare programs that do address the underlying causes of chronic disease. And I'm going to tell you about a couple of them. The first one is called Intensive Cardiac Rehab, and this was based on research over 25 peer-reviewed papers over a 35-year period by Dr. Dean Ornish, who pioneered the demonstrated effectiveness and cost savings of treating the #1 cause of death in the United States, which is cardiovascular disease, with a strict regimen of exercise, a plant-based whole foods diet, and stress reduction. And in 2011, we achieved a very significant milestone in the way we treat disease, period, in the United States, when CMS approved this program for reimbursement. This is the first time we had shifted value to treat the underlying cause of a disease instead of just treating the symptoms, like stents, surgeries, and multiple hospitalizations. It took Dr. Ornish 16 years of lobbying CMS to get this approved for reimbursement. Participants in the Medicare Intensive Cardiac Rehab program save the taxpayers on average about $18,000 in medical costs over a 3-year period, compared with standard treatment of cardiovascular disease. In another recent parallel development, Dr. Matthew Longjohn demonstrated the efficacy of a community-based program of 12 months of structured classes on diet and exercise for individuals who meet the criteria of being pre-diabetic, which is about 27% of the US population, or about 4 of you in this room right now are pre-diabetic. So anyway, Medicare participants in this program saved on average over $3,800 on a 3-year period compared to standard treatment of medication, insulin, and hospitalizations. And incidentally, Dr. Longjohn is currently running for Congress in Michigan's 6th District. But both of these programs represent the exciting new evolution of Medicare reimbursing for what is becoming known as lifestyle medicine in the treatment of chronic disease. With this approach, instead of continually mopping up the water that's overflowing onto the floor, we can turn off the faucet. But as healthcare providers, we have to understand that utilization of treatment programs such as these have to be carried out in the knowledge that individuals are often at the mercy of their broader social, physical, and economic environments. And instead of blaming patients, which frequently happens, for non-compliance, as can happen in the cases of inequity, we have to address the root causes that make patients have unhealthy lifestyles. We know that when incomes drop and family budgets shrink, the first items dropped are usually healthier foods like fruits and vegetables, and food choices shift to low-cost, refined, starchy foods, which are the best way to fill up hungry stomachs. Thus, we know that counties with high poverty rates have been shown to have obesity rates that are 145% higher than wealthier counties, and they also have much higher rates of diabetes as well. We believe that it's necessary to address the political root causes of much of the proliferation of chronic disease, which takes up 75% of our healthcare dollars, namely poverty, lack of money to buy, and lack of time to prepare healthy food. So this proposal highlights the importance of achieving a single-payer Medicare for all system in which everyone has access to the same treatments and has the same ability, we have the same ability to promote treatments of disease that are not profit-driven. So this is an aspirational proposal. After we achieve a Medicare for All program, approximately 305,000 former Medicaid recipients in Arkansas that are pre-diabetics would become eligible for the Medicare Diabetes Prevention Program, and many more will become eligible for intensive cardiac rehab. What we propose is, However, we know that with the tight grocery budget, going through a lifestyle management program makes it difficult to adhere to these diets due to lack of money to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. So with a small portion of the aforementioned savings that we've talked about with these 2 programs, we propose to launch the Medicare Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, which would give participants with incomes up to 150% of the federal poverty level the opportunity to receive fresh fruits and vegetables prescribed by their referring physicians and administered through these 2 programs. The individual's participation in the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program would be voluntary on their part and would be in addition to any SNAP or WIC benefits they already receive. And their participation in the program would overlap the same year period of time that we already have demonstrated cost savings for. So how it works, we would prioritize local farmers in procuring contracts with CMS to supply the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. This produce could be delivered to the participating program locations for distribution. The farmers could coordinate with program dietary instructors that could instruct individuals cooking methods with locally available produce. And given the widespread nature of prediabetes and cardiovascular disease in this country, and the business case for developing new ICR programs, along with a new demand for a large production of fresh fruits and vegetables, this program could create a steady and increasing demand for local farmers growing fresh fruits and vegetables, stimulate economic activity in dying rural areas, and at the same time decrease the crippling cost of medical care for this most expensive of populations, thus creating a virtuous cycle of economic sustainability. So to put it into perspective, every individual that we could pull in off the street that is pre-diabetic and put them through this program and give them 3 years of fresh fruits and vegetables, besides, the taxpayers would save $200. So this is not just a revenue neutral program, it is a revenue positive program for the taxpayers, while at the same time creating and financing hundreds and thousands of jobs for local farmers across the country and reviving rural economies. This is what a not-for-profit healthcare system could look like. And our next speaker is Andrew LeMay, speaking on affordable housing and ensuring dignified standards of living.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm Andrew LeMay. I'm on staff here at Paul Spencer's campaign as well. I'm also a former student of Paul's, and I'm happy to talk to you today about affordable housing and some of our plans for it. I myself have never really wanted for affordable housing. I've been in the middle of the middle class for my entire life. I've always had a roof over my head. And knowing that makes me realize that we need to do more in this country to ensure that for every American. Currently, the main way the government helps renters is through the Housing Choice Voucher Program, commonly known as Section 8. This is beneficial for the people who receive it, but as anyone who has dealt with it, whether as a social worker or someone who receives it, it's chronically underfunded, relies on long waiting lists that people can remain on for up to a decade, and often then at the end of it, you're chosen through a lottery system, so you don't even know if you're going to get it at that point. And even though I've never had to go through this program, living in Arkansas, you don't have to look far to see how badly we need to reform how we help people who rent in this country. Arkansas is probably the worst state in the country to rent. We are the only state that doesn't have a guarantee of habitability standard for landlords, meaning that they don't actually have to guarantee that a rental property has running water or heat or things like that. And we also are one of 10 states that still allow retaliatory evictions from landlords. And this cycle of eviction feeds into a more predatory cycle that we've already talked about. People who lose their wealth are forced into fringe banking entities like payday lenders. And whenever you're evicted, you're also forced into paying the people who move your furniture out of your house. You're forced into onerous legal fees to try to fight the eviction. And so we need to do more to stop that. And what we're proposing is expanding the Section 8 voucher program to every low-income American, meaning instead of placing people on long waiting lists and then picking them by lottery, if you are eligible for this program, you will simply receive it. Currently, we would put the standard of eligibility for that at a $54,000 a year household income, because we want to expand this not only to lower income people into the middle class as well. We need to stop looking at affordable housing as something that is only provided to the poor when they hit a rough patch. We need to start ensuring it as a right to every American, the same way that we're fighting to ensure health care as a right to every American. And as part of that as well, we cannot simply expand the voucher program and expect that to fix everything. Obviously, currently many landlords love receiving Section 8 vouchers because they know it's a guaranteed source of income for them. And so instead of simply putting more people at the hands of predatory landlords, we need to craft a federal tenants' bill of rights so that when states like Arkansas do not step up and protect the renters in their states, as our General Assembly has proven itself unable to do, we need to have the federal government step in and protect the rights of those renters to actually have a guarantee of habitability so that they can have homes that they can live in and prosper in. And we also recognize that expanding this voucher program is just the first step in ensuring affordable housing for every American. The next step is moving those people into an easier path to home ownership. And so we're proposing greater federal funding for community land trusts and things like the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund and things like the Arkansas Housing Trust Fund, so that we can actually build more homes for these people that are affordable and that they can move into and start building their wealth, as we'll talk about a little later as well. And depriving our fellow Americans of homes is an insult to human dignity, and we need to be willing to take bold action to prevent that. and to prove that our nation values all of its people at all stages. And so with that, I'll leave you. Thank you. And I'm going to introduce Ferrari Scroggins. He's going to be talking to you about restoring black wealth and attaining long denied equity for communities of color. So thank you.
As he said, I'm Ferrari Scroggins. That is my real name, spelled just like the car. All right, we're going to talk about restoring black wealth and obtaining long denied equity in communities of color. While social inequality runs rampant through the United States, systematic racism makes that issue catastrophic to communities of color. While our nation has historically oppressed black and brown Americans and deprived them of the means to build wealth, recent history has erased what little progress has been made on that front. The impact of the 2008 financial crisis in particular was particularly brutal to these communities. Black and Hispanic households lost up to 70% of their wealth on average, while their white counterparts lost only 30%. And these communities have not yet recovered, with the white households currently holding an average net worth of $171,000, or 10 times the median wealth of a black household. To begin setting this injustice right, we have to recognize that black Americans have faced a myriad of barriers to achieve the kind of life that has always been available to their white counterparts in this country. From slavery to Jim Crow to redlining districts to modern mass incarcerations, these fellow Americans have been punished simply because of the color of their skin. Denying or limiting people whom look just like me the right to build their wealth has been the most effective means of ensuring that non-white Americans remain disproportionately poor, which in turn perpetuates every other racist system in this country. While we need programs that will lift up every American, such as Medicare for all, a living wage, paid family leave, we need to directly target communities of color with a program to restore the wealth that was stolen from them either in the 2008 financial crisis or the previous centuries. Achieving this goal requires a fight on several fronts. Our plan to universalize housing vouchers and create affordable path to home ownership is one of the most important planks, as home ownership is a powerful tool in establishing anybody's wealth here in this country. In order for this to happen, we need to provide communities of color with not a handout, but the tools to generate opportunities to open businesses and create jobs for ourselves. While plenty of politicians in the 2nd District specifically brag about creating jobs with big box stores, those jobs are often short-term and precarious, and oftentimes those businesses don't hire people in that community that they've opened that business to work for them. By providing ultra-low interest loans through the postal banking system, individuals who want to open small businesses where they live, that'll help people open small businesses where they live. Restoring storefronts in communities of color or other economically distressed areas could create more jobs other than to simply attracting a multinational corporation to build a plant and create a more permanent way for those communities to establish wealth and have that wealth remain in that community. There are plenty of entrepreneurs that are already in these communities that already run businesses such as daycare, salons, food trucks, stuff of that nature. And providing them with the opportunity to make their businesses more visible and marketable, we can create an economic environment where minority communities can begin to flourish rather than remain stagnant. Alongside this program of business development, we must also stimulate these distressed communities through federally funded urban beautification projects and construction of new community centers and libraries. And by beautification, I don't mean gentrification, because gentrification pushes those people who have already been in those communities out of those communities. We need to make that community, we need to try to build those communities up and make them beautiful for the people who've remained there in those communities during these hard economic times. To ease the strain on working families, we are also proposing a universal after-school care program for all public schools. These programs will give kids both a safe, supervised environment when they finish school. It will remove the worry of parents that are unable to get off of work before their kids are out of school. And it'll oftentimes give some kids who don't get a chance to eat dinner at home the opportunity to get their third meal of the day, because a lot of kids get both their breakfast and lunches at school. As we strive to increase these economic opportunities for communities of color, we must also restore the democratic rights that are often denied or forgotten about until a presidential election as well. Accomplishing this restoration will require the passing of automatic voter registration after high school, restoring the voting rights of felons once they've completed their time served, and democratizing local school boards and giving people who live in those communities a bigger voice in how their neighborhood operates. Anyone who lives in Central Arkansas, and particularly Little Rock, can see the disastrous effects of systematic racism and economic oppression. Instead of creating equity for all people, we have thrown up interstates as barriers and allocated wealth and security based solely on whether or not someone is white. We must reject this typical approach. We must reject the typical approaches to race which distort our nation's past and simply present platitudes about reform. We must instead recognize the debt that is owed to these communities and have the courage to repay them and truly allow every American to be the master of their own fate. Now I'd like to present Reed. He's going to come back and finish this up.
So, again, my name's Reed Brewer. I'm on staff with Paul Spencer for Congress. I'm a former student, like many of us here, not Meredith or Leif, but we are, again, driven by a lot that Paul talks about. I was in his class when Citizens United was decided, and at that time, I didn't have any idea what that meant, but I knew that Paul was mad. I knew that Mr. Spencer had talked a lot about Buckley v. Vallejo and other court cases that led up to Citizens United, but I didn't know at that time that our history was being rewritten, and Paul did. And I left a lucrative job over at THV so I could work on this campaign, not because of an allegiance to a former teacher, but somebody that I thought needed to be in office, somebody that I thought was trustable, somebody that I thought was going to tell me the truth. And that's why a lot of us are standing here today. And I'm here to talk about the sixth and final plank of our Roots Up platform, and that's eliminating student debt and securing economic futures. I can speak about on this, and I think many of us can speak about on this issue, not as someone that you would find at a think tank that knows every number or that has the ability to regurgitate fact after fact, but the idea that we feel this pain. I myself have $80,000 worth of student debt, just from an undergraduate degree. $28,000 of that is sponsored by the federal loan program, which have 6.8% interest. That's the federal government making money on my back just because I wanted an English degree. Arkansas is devastatingly hurt by this. According to a Talk Business article that is quoting an Experian study, Arkansas is 5th in the nation in people that default on their student loans, or they're 3 months behind on their student loans. The average Arkansan has over $31,000 in student loan debt. Most of those are from an undergraduate degree. And the median income of a single person, the single income earner is under $24,000 a year. So these people are stuck in a cycle where they cannot build wealth. They're stuck in a cycle where they're told that their education is a punishment, and they can't ever escape. I think that many of us could talk about how many millennials that we see that still live at home, that don't own a car, that have no opportunity to ever even own a home, which is the number one cause or the number one ability to build wealth in this country. And we're denied that. And so our program, and to put this in perspective, in the United States, 44 million Americans have $1.4 trillion in debt. That's 8% of the gross domestic product of the entire United States. And we're told by politicians, both in this race and throughout the country, that it's not feasible to talk about ways to resolve that problem. But yet those are the same politicians that said bailing out the AIG, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, GM, Chrysler, those were feasible. We have to think differently. We have to think boldly. And we have to be told that when someone says it's not feasible, that means they're telling you never. And so what we're talking about is we will and this is, I would caution as a reporter not to say forgiving, because they did nothing wrong to incur this debt, but we are eliminating student debt on the federal level and all privately held student debt. That's $1.4 trillion, like I said. But it's been estimated, and we'll give you information on it, that $86 to $106 billion will be added to the gross domestic product each year. And in its peak job growth, it'll be 1.2 million to 1.5 million jobs per year, which you would see in the first 7 years. If we're going to talk about investing in people, then this is the program that we have to do. And these are non-negotiable planks, and I think that we can all agree on that. And these things are feasible, just like Meredith talked about. A postal banking system is applicable in 180 or 138 other countries. There's no reason that we can't do that here. There's no reason that we have to tell those 44 million Americans, like myself and like many of us that are suffering from student loan debt, that your life doesn't matter. That you're going to have to work at Starbucks and Target and THV so you can pay that off. That's wrong. It's not just. And so, I'll bring Paul back up, but I just would like to say that this is why we're standing here. And when we talk to people, every single person that we've talked to in Van Buren County in the past 8 months has mentioned internet. They can't even phone bank for us online because the internet speed is too slow. So we have about 10 or 15 committed volunteers in Van Buren County that I print call sheets for them and mail every day or every Monday. Because that's how committed people actually are to what we're talking about. Because we're at least addressing them and listening to them. And these policies aren't something that we crafted out of thin air like Paul was talking about. These are things that people have told us they need. And not just what they want, but what they deserve. And so here's Paul.
Thanks, Bill. Oh. I think somebody's listening to me. So, again, these aren't haphazard types of things that we've just kind of put together out of thin air. All these folks and all the folks that we've talked to recognize a real need. And the question is, how do you do these things? What way do you alleviate the suffering of people who don't have internet or have too much student loan debt or live in substandard housing and so forth? And there's no panacea. But if you don't start looking at some point, you're never going to find a way to do those things. And the thing that we need to understand as people running for office, whether it's on a local level or a national level, is sometimes you just have to not look for the most popular way forward, not look for the poll-tested way forward, not look for the ways that, you know, all through this, again, like I said at the beginning, all through this race, we've been ridiculed for one thing or another, whether it's not taking PAC money or we've been criticized for going out into the outlying counties. What kind of party or what kind of media will criticize a candidate for wanting to talk to the constituents, saying you shouldn't talk to those folks because it doesn't make political sense to do that. You know, it's time to start making things make political sense. Unless we just want to write off most of the people in the state. Because if you look at Arkansas, you know, we're a flyover state. And just as easily as our candidates in this race and other races ignore the people that live in the rural communities, the rest of the country could just as soon do that with this type of a state here. So it's incumbent upon us and everybody, you know, whether you're running for city council in Conway or running for governor of this state, to really begin to look and see what the opportunities exist. And you forge a new path forward. You know, like the party, we don't have any litmus test to various things. Our only litmus test when it comes to looking at programs and policies and ideas is, does it benefit people? Is it going to help my neighbor? Is it going to help the people of the 2nd District? Is it going to help the people in this country? And again, that's the first goal, I think, of every elected official. It's not a self-serving adventure where you can see how far you can rise on the political ladder by saying, well, I made it into the U.S. House of Representatives, now I'll be in the Senate, and then I'll become a cabinet member or president. That's not what this is about. At least it shouldn't be. Because if that's what it's about, you shouldn't be running for the House, or you shouldn't be running for anything. So, you know, we need to move forward. The past is the past. It's just time to start forging ahead. We've had over 3,500 people donate to our campaign so far. Those folks all have the same thing in common. They want to see a campaign, they want to see government that's responsive to their needs, whether they're here or in Van Buren County or White County. So I thank you all for coming today, and we'll gladly answer any questions you might have.